Moving back to our paper speakers. Speaking second in proposition, we have Laura Locke. Laura is a second year reading HSPS at Downing College. She won the right to speak through open audition. Laura, I'm really looking forward to what you have to say.
It's another white bitch talking about radical systemic change. Now, I have got 10 minutes to convince you that our current political and economic systems are fundamentally unfit for purpose and that radical systemic change is the only viable option for securing a just and sustainable future. Easy. Now, I want to begin by expanding on what we mean by radical systemic change, because I agree there's a bit of confusion. And quite simply, I'm asking you to ground this debate in the recognition that we could do significantly better than we are today. We live in a global economic system that is supposed to have tripled in size by the same year that we need to decarbonize it. In a market system that's decided, in the US at least, that dogs are entitled to a longer maternity leave than women, and we have built our societies, education, and health systems around structures that purposefully oppress and discriminate people based on the geographic accident of their birth. I'm shaking a lot, I'm very sorry. Now, radical systemic change isn't a noun. It's not this static endpoint where we're all living in village-sized vegan communities and we don't use iPhones and we sing Kumbaya, though I don't think that would be so horrible. Rather, it's a process, a deeply intersectional process that recognizes that our political and economic structures do not work for everyone. The oppressive consequences of these structures are not an accident. Systemic racism, colonialism, the patriarchy, those aren't mistakes. Rather, those are the very pillars that enable the functioning of our systems. Radical systemic change isn't this abstract concept that requires stepping into an unknown abyss, but a recognition that we could live in a world that doesn't require oppression to simply function. Now, if you've ever had the misfortune of speaking to me for longer than about 10 seconds, you'll know that there's only ever 3 things on my mind. That is politics, men, and climate change. So, quite unsurprisingly, I'm going to center the majority of my argument around these 3 things, demonstrating how our systems have not only created the greatest challenges we're facing and failed to respond to them, but generated hyper-inequality and reinforced this through ineffective structures. So, climate change, a direct manifestation of how our systems do not function, the 6th mass extinction, the crisis that's estimated to be responsible for the displacement of over 1 billion people in the next 3 decades, and the social movement that somehow led to the arrest of Andrew Tate. Climate change is a structural issue that requires connecting struggles of justice from the distributive to the retributive and the intergenerational. It's not the inevitable result of natural cycles, but a direct product of suicidal capitalist systems that have spent decades treating the environment as an economic externality that can be used and disposed of without consequence. Since the 1990s, just 100 companies have been responsible for over 70% of global carbon emissions. And that's not to mention the role of colonialism, the role of indigenous genocide, or the role of neoliberal production practices in systematically, intentionally, and violently operating to extract wealth, concentrate it in amongst a select elite while causing irreparable loss and damage across the global south. The richest oil companies today are quite simply repackaged colonial powers. I mean, Shell was literally born out of the Dutch East India Company. We need to connect these struggles to one another because any change that fails to do so is going to be directly complicit in re-entrenching these structures. Now, this isn't a crisis that can be solved by using a bamboo toothbrush and turning off a light. We cannot answer the climate issue within the same systems of oppression that created it. I love the idea of gradual, incremental, fun times, but it doesn't work like that. We're facing over 4 decades. Nah, my mental health can't handle that. 4 decades of political inaction and systemic failure. And we won't be able to solve this crisis until we have a system that actually treats it as one. This summer, when for the first time in history the UK hit 40 degrees, media outlets advertised it as a good day to go to the beach. That's like looking at a Category 5 hurricane, and saying, let's go fly a kite. It's ridiculous. Yes, countries are introducing policies. JCRs have green officers. The World Bank has some really, really effective structural adjustment programs. But if we aren't looking at the systemic factors and the origins of modern problems, then we're putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds when we could be banning guns. No, did you not get the point? I'm sorry. Now, I hope you're keeping up, and if you're not, please do come find me in the bar afterwards, especially if you're single and over 6 foot. I'll have lots of time for you then. Now, with that, moving on to the next key problem. Oh, wait. Men. Former Irish President Mary Robinson famously said that climate change is a man-made problem that requires a feminist solution. Similarly to COVID, the issue of climate has exacerbated crises of gender inequality. Women are 80% more likely to be displaced by climate, and yet they make up less than 34% of country negotiators on climate policy. We are 14. I'm a humanities student, I can't count. We are 14 times more likely to die in climate disasters, and yet women under 30 make up less than 1% of global parliamentarians. Now, I'm not suggesting that gender-balanced, diverse parliaments would, solve climate change, end global suffering, and stop conflict. The Tories have shown us that much. But surely, a system that produced such grave inequality cannot produce the answer to it. This isn't about asking for a seat at the table or making more diverse cabinets. The table is fucking broken. The table was ordered off Amazon Prime. Ordered on Amazon Prime with very fast delivery. It's got about one leg left, and even that one's on fire. This is about building a new table, one that isn't enabling exploitation, upholding discrimination, or forcing workers to pee in plastic bottles. I mean, come on. I don't think all men are the spawn of the devil, most of the time. But we cannot address one form of injustice without recognizing how it intersects and interacts with other injustices around the world. We urgently need radical systemic change to put those closest to pain closest to power, because if we're responding to these issues in silos without accounting for their distributed impacts across gender, across race, across class, across health, we're pulling at straws. We're cutting one head off the monster while another 3 grow. The global architecture has to change. So on a much lighter note, I once shagged a guy who had a Union Jack above his bed. And that was a red flag. I mean, admittedly, a red, white, and blue flag. But his whole point was that the world is better today than it's ever been. As I'm sure the opposition will make, poverty is theoretically at an all-time low. Sure, the world's burning, but we've got 5G. So his argument was the world is better than it's ever been. But I want to ask you, better for who? And better at what cost? Is it really better for the international workers that are propping up the modern economy with no access to unions, 0-hour contracts, and falling pay? Is it really better for the communities that are having to flee their homes due to extreme weather events, or those in London that are already dying as a consequence of air pollution? No. When I'm medicated in a couple months, maybe. Not now. The government of Tuvalu is currently creating a digital nation, because they know that their country won't survive the rising sea levels and they want to protect its memory for future generations. We have a country that is literally moving into the metaverse. Surely that's not better than ever. Surely. Inequality today is higher than it's ever been. Roughly half the world's wealth is concentrated in the top 1%. We've heard this all before. Every year we're breaking records for the hottest year. We can't solve this with incremental fixes. The world for Jeff Bezos may be better than it's ever been, but that's because he's destroying the world for the remaining 99%. And then we got on to my favorite pillow talk, the UN. Now, for shits and giggles, let's have a chat about the UN. Because while our economies and our societies have globalized, our politics remains stubbornly national. Yes, there are exceptions, but ultimately, the political structures that govern the world today are locked into the same power dynamics that formed them in 1945. Even today, where we have a member of the Security Council invading another country, there is no working mechanism to stop that, remove them from the Security Council, or by any means do anything even moderately significant. And now I know that's not fair. But the UN manages to enable the illusion of change while relying on the same historic power imbalances. Exxon scientists discovered and predicted climate change in the 1970s. We've had 50 years. But with political structures that prioritize economic growth, externalize the environment, we don't stand a chance. The UN produced the Paris Agreement, and then Trump pulled out. And now Biden's back in, but Biden is also approving drilling projects in federal lands. We cannot leave our future up to the whims of political leaders, especially American ones. Now, COVID has demonstrated that if we really want to, we can make swift, radical change. Climate and the intersecting injustices that it exacerbates make a clear case for how our systems benefit the few at the detriment of the many. So to those of you who are still thinking of voting for the opposition, I want to ask you, whose interests are you defending? Are you defending those who've acquired their wealth on decades of exploitation? Men with Union Jacks above their bed, which even if you're a virulent nationalist has to be sinful in more ways than one? Or Jeff Bezos, because we all know how much Jeff Bezos cares about you. I know the idea of radical systemic change can feel paralyzing. It's an unknown. What we have is all we've ever grown up with. But everything around us is changing. It's not enough to do no harm. We have to be actively, radically, and intentionally going after a system that serves us all. That means building our own tables, recalibrating our systems of value and development, and fighting for a world that we are actually proud to pass on to future generations. Don't be a part of the problem. Be the entire bloody problem. Fuck with the system and challenge power structures. We can do so much better. Thank you.